We are saved by faith and not by moral works of the law. In fact, faith and self-righteous works of the law are opposing ideas in Scripture. But in Romans chapter 3, Paul makes a startling statement about the real way that God truly saves people. He mentions a law that exists outside of God's law that he gave to Moses and Israel. What is this spiritual law that Paul is referring to, and how can we truly know that we've been saved from our sin and death? Let's jump into the Word of God to find out. We're in Romans chapter 3, starting in verse 21. We're going to start talking about the righteousness of God. But before we address that, understand what came before this. Paul just talked about how the law and the purpose for which God gave the law was to expose our sin. Through the law comes a knowledge of sin. Therefore, we can't look to the law to save. The law actually shuts the mouths of people who feel self-righteous and stand on their moral efforts, and the law exposes everyone as a sinner in the sight of God without faith. So we can't look to the law to save us. Paul has addressed the fact that even within the nation of Israel, there are those who are faithless to the covenant of God, but God remains faithful. And so when we tackle this section right here, we want to think about the main points that came before this. A couple of the main points was that even within the nation of Israel, there are those who are faithless and there are those who are faithful. But nonetheless, God is still faithful to his covenant, his word, and his promises. And one more thing to think about is besides that, the law simply exposes our problem. The law shows us that we are helpless, that we're incapable of meeting God's standard, that we are simply unable to be perfect people in the sight of God. So there has to be a different way besides the law that God declares someone righteous and grants them entrance into his kingdom. That's what we'll be talking about here. And then eventually, we will end up getting to this law that seems to exist outside of the law of God, yet is consistent with it at the same time. It's a fascinating concept. Paul says, but now the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. So again, the main ideas in the last passage included the law, included our sinfulness, included man's faithlessness, but God's faithfulness. And so I just want to be thinking about how those ideas connect to what Paul is saying here. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight a few key words that you'll want to pay attention to. The righteousness of God. We've already addressed the law, right? And within that, we're going to see the prophets are kind of lumped into this category that the law is lumped into, which is just the Hebrew scriptures. And then we'll see the righteousness of God again. But here, Paul is addressing what? That now, at this point in human history when he's writing this, after the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus and the ascension of Christ, now, at this time, the righteousness of God has been manifested, and it's actually apart from the law. Now, I just want to be thinking about how has God revealed his righteousness? How has God manifested or made known his very righteousness? And what is this righteousness even? Is this the righteousness he extends people in his sight so they can be righteous? Or is this his very perfection and his unspeakable qualities being made known to humanity? In a sense that that's unattainable. We could never be that. He's perfect. He's holy. He's blameless. He's on another level. Is it God revealing his, really what makes him different from creation? Or is it God revealing the way in which someone can be made righteous? And so I just want to be asking questions. I'll put question marks here because I don't know. Hopefully Paul will answer that question, these questions I have as we read. The second thing to consider is he says the righteousness of God has been manifested how? Apart from the law. Okay. And this is where people will typically go to one extreme and go, see, righteousness has nothing to do with the law. That's not what it says. It actually says apart from the law and our efforts to keep the law, righteousness has been revealed. Let's keep reading. How has it been manifested is another question that I have. And I'll highlight that in blue. Any concept of something being revealed or manifested or made known, how has it been manifested? Well, apart from the law, number one, although the law and the prophets bear witness to it. So in other words, this righteousness of God, though it is apart from, outside of the law, it is not without the law. The law actually bears witness along with the prophets. The law and the prophets, the Hebrew scriptures, testify of this righteousness that God has now revealed. So I want to be thinking about, okay, So it's not by means of the law, but it's not completely without the law. The law plays a role somehow in testifying of this righteousness God has for his people, which is starting to answer the question is, what is this righteousness? Is it God going, I'm awesome, you're not? And you're like, yes, you are. Or is it God saying, I can make you righteous, here's how? The second one seems to be what's in mind here. God is revealing how his righteousness can actually be given to a person. The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. In other words, we're starting to get some, I just want to back it up and think about what has been said about this righteousness. And I'm going to put a number next to it. Number 1, it's been manifested. Number 2, it's apart from the law. Number 3, this righteousness of God. And this is what I do when I read the Bible. I notice, things that are being said about a certain subject. And I just want to note the characteristics or the different descriptions that are being noted about that thing. So in this case, it's the righteousness of God. Number 1, it's been revealed. Number 2, it's apart from the law, not by means of the law. Number 3, the law and the prophets bear witness to it and testify of it. And it's the righteousness of God. Number 4, it's through faith. It's through faith, specifically in Jesus Christ. And number 5, it's for all who believe. So I'm just going to highlight anything that has to do with faith, belief, and I did that on purpose because that's going to relate to how God has manifested his righteousness. It's not through your efforts to keep the law. It's not by you doing enough good and offsetting your evil with moral goodness. It's actually admitting the law exposes my sinfulness, shows me what sin is, so I'm rendered helpless. And then righteousness, however, right? Sin is revealed in the law, but righteousness is revealed through faith in Jesus for all who believe. In other words, this is God gifting righteousness and showing the way that someone can become righteous, and it's through faith. That's what makes it apart from the law. So when we have questions where it's like, what does it mean that it's apart from the law? Well, part of the way we answer that is by understanding that it's through faith. And oftentimes faith and self-righteous works of the law are indeed opposites in Scripture. That doesn't mean faith will never produce works or obedience or good fruit. This just means you can try to strive in your own human efforts to attain what the law demands, or you can trust, believe, rely on Jesus to grant you righteousness. You can't do both. But from a place of believing in Jesus, for all who believe, you're made righteous. God gifts you his own righteousness, 2 Corinthians 5. But at the same time, that faith will bear good fruit. Okay, so he says 4. He says there is no distinction. In other words, this plays into his argument. The Jewish reader might hear this or read this and go, hold on, God's righteousness is for Abraham and his offspring. And Paul's going to tie these things together. He's already made it very clear, both Jew and Gentile are under sin. No one is without sin, everyone has sinned. So, therefore, everyone is rendered helpless and condemned and incapable of doing what the law demands, whether you're Jewish or Gentile. And circumcision physically has nothing to do with it, doesn't help you. Knowing the law doesn't help you. Having the law doesn't help you. He's already made these arguments. So now he's going to continue that point of saying Jew and Gentile on equal footing, kind of seems like it, by saying, look, there's no distinction. Anyone who believes can have this righteousness. And the Jewish reader would go, hold on, Gentile too? And God's going, that's right. There is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. This word for tells me that whatever he's about to say here is going to prove or further explain the reasoning behind this, what he said before. There is no distinction, for or because, or here comes the reason why. All have sinned. That's why there's no distinction. Meaning if God distinguished in his mind between Jew and Gentile and who got faith and righteousness, then he's not really considering their own sinfulness. And you go, why? Well, because all have sinned. And that's what puts us all on equal footing and equal need for Jesus. Everyone has sinned. Everyone's made a mistake in heart, in thought, in motive, in intent, in speech, in action, in attitude, all these different things. Everyone has fallen short of God's perfect standard. No one's perfect. And everyone falls short of God's glory. Now, something that I just notice as a little ADHD kid, I go, what does the glory of God have to do with this? We've talked about the law, and this is what I like to do, because the biblical authors are incredibly smart, and they're brilliant the way they piece ideas together as the Spirit leads them. But I haven't seen necessarily anything relating to the glory of God. That seems to be a new idea. I've noticed the law and righteousness and faith and circumcision. Those ideas Paul has touched on. But where have we seen the glory of God? You might want to go back, read the first 2 chapters of Romans, and see if you find, maybe do a word search in a Bible app and see if you find any occurrence of this phrase, God's glory, being touched on. Because I just want to be thinking about, he didn't say fall short of God's law. And you go, well, he doesn't have to, because the glory of God is seen, his character is revealed in the law and in that perfect standard. To which I would go, sure, but the word Paul actually uses, you can go to a Greek lexicon, is referring to those unspeakable qualities, God's radiant goodness, if I can speak, his glory, his renown, his reputation, his weightiness. Why is it that we fall short of his glory? And he doesn't specifically say the law. He doesn't explicitly call out that. So just something to think about, right? I want to read slow enough to recognize those things and go, how does God's glory fit into our falling short, our own sinfulness, and God showing no distinction when he saves people? And all are justified. I say all because he's continuing to talk about the all, right? All have sinned, number 1. All fall short, number 2, of God's glory. And all are justified by his grace. As a gift. As a gift. So obviously to sin, there has to be some standard that you're violating, some rules that you're breaking, right? That's where we see the law of God kind of brought back into play. We see God's perfect standard in the law. His character is revealed in the law. So if you've sinned, you obviously have a standard that you're violating or falling short of. If you're falling short of something, you'd think it's the same thing, but he addresses the glory. And if you're going to be justified, and if you don't know what the word justify means, this is what I do as a Bible reader. I want to go and look up the meaning, the definition in the original language. I want to look at where else that word is used. I want to look at the context to help me piece together aspects of that word and definition. All are justified by his grace. So maybe what I'll do is I'll highlight in blue anything that Paul is saying about these all, right? All sin, all fall short, all are justified by his grace as a gift. And this gift, this justifying, it's through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. Paul brings us back to what he just said about having faith in Jesus. Because as a Jewish, listener or reader, having this read out loud or having this in front of you as you're reading the scroll, you're going, what does Jesus have to do with this? And Paul's going, everything. The law can't help you. Circumcision can't help you. Descending from Abraham can't help you. Jesus can, as he is the fulfillment and the substance of all those different things. They all point to him. Whether it's the law, the prophets, physical circumcision, Abraham and the promises given to him, Jesus is the whole reason anyone can be justified or declared righteous by his grace as a gift. So I just want to highlight what helps me understand what it means to be justified. You're not justified by doing enough good and God goes, okay, you earned it. You're not justified by knowing enough or educating yourself into it, though there is understanding, right? Faith comes through hearing. The justifying is his grace. In what way? It's a gift. It's free. You didn't work for it. You didn't deserve it. And you go, how can he justify someone who has sinned and falls short of his glory? Well, that comes through the redemption that is in Jesus, which I'll highlight in orange. Jesus is the reason for the season. No, he's the reason for our ability to be justified. You go, how's it possible? Christ. What did he do? He accomplished our redemption. What does that look like? He'll explain in verse 25. The redemption that makes way for our justification, which is to say, now you can be right in the sight of God. Now you can have right relationship with God and right standing before him. That is the product of Jesus' redeeming work, his redemptive work, purchasing back, laying down his life. So I want to understand this redemption that he's going to explain in verse 25 and on. And as I understand what Christ has done, I'll better understand what it means that I'm justified as a gift of God's abundant grace. And then I'll better understand what it really means that I sinned and fell short of God's glory on a deeper level. So Jesus, whom God put forward as a propitiation by his blood, to be received by faith. By faith. I just want to highlight that because he's already noted the aspect of believing, trusting, having faith in, relying on. He's already talked about this in verse 22. He wants to reiterate the point. It is not of works. It is not moral efforts. It is not abiding by the law. It's believing in Jesus, which of course, the overflow of that faith and the result and the fruit of that faith is going to be expressed through obedience and love and all the different fruits of the Spirit. But Jesus here is put forward. And I just want to highlight let's do yellow. Anything that helps us understand who Jesus is and what he's done. He was put forward by the Father. He is our propitiation, which is the appeasement of God's wrath. And you go, what's that mean? The satisfactory payment. His blood was shed. And now how is he received? That's something I want to think about. How do I receive this glorious work? How do I receive and benefit from what Christ has done for me? I want to participate in that. I want to be a beneficiary of his redemption. I want the gift God offers by his grace. I want to be justified. I don't want to be falling short and marked by my sin and condemned. How do I participate? You receive Jesus and his work by faith. That's what he said in verse 22. And it's on us to take note of any repeating ideas and words that we see repeating. Faith is a repeating idea. This was to show God's righteousness. Remember how we opened this up by saying, now the righteousness of God has been manifested? And we said, in what way? And so far we pieced together that the righteousness of God being revealed simply means God is showing how you can receive his righteousness. Verse 25 goes back to that original question or idea that was put forth. This was to show God's righteousness because, and you go, how does God show his righteousness? Because he says this. What? This putting forward of his son, this shedding of Jesus' blood, Jesus yielding his life and willingly dying in our place. This redemptive work of Jesus, this propitiation, right? This was to show God's righteousness. In other words, what Paul has in mind here is the gospel. The entire letter to the Romans is the whole, just explaining the beautiful aspects and components of the gospel. It's the truth about Jesus and what he's done. And he's saying that message, that truth about Christ and what he's done, it shows God's righteousness. And you go, how? He goes, because. Here's why or here's how. Here's why Paul can say God's righteousness is revealed or displayed to the world through the work of Jesus. Because in his divine forbearance, he passed over former sins. And it was to show his righteousness. So I'm just going to highlight that again, this concept. If you notice, we've seen several times. In verse 21, one time. In verse 22, two times. Verse 25, three times. Verse 26, four times in the last 5 verses. The idea of God showing his righteousness, revealing his righteousness. Just think about that. And it was to show his righteousness at the present time so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith. So there's a lot of just in the English language at least, there's a lot of things for us to piece together right now. So let's break this down. This is what I do when I read the Bible. If I have a really long sentence like this, and you go, that's not one sentence. Well, in my mind, it kind of looks like it. What I'll do is I'll begin to piece this together by separating it into different clauses or phrases. So for instance, here's what I'll do. I'll highlight in yellow anything that helps me look at it as a separate phrase, and then I can piece it together. Sometimes you have to break something apart to understand it as a whole, right? So this was to show God's righteousness, because now he's going to explain why. In his divine forbearance, which I'll highlight in yellow, then I'll highlight in orange a different phrase. He passed over former sins. Okay, so I'll just take that as two separate thoughts. Those as two separate thoughts. God passed over former sins. Well, how? Think about Passover. We see this in Exodus when God rescues Israel out of Egypt. Just have that in mind, okay? God passes over former sins. And you go, when? How? Who is this for? He seems to have in mind still all people who have sinned. So this is God having cosmic level patience for all of humanity across time. And in that divine forbearance, which is to delay the penalty or the debt, right? He's delaying, requiring the payment. He's going, I'm not going to require you to pay quite yet. I'll be patient. And in that, he passed over former sins. So we have the idea of passing over. We have the idea of great patience and delaying the penalty or debt. And this passing over, this showing great patience towards humanity, it shows his righteousness at the present time. Interesting. So now we can piece that together. At the present time. And remember how this started out in verse 21. He says, now the righteousness of God has been manifested. Very clearly perceived and understood in the gospel. This is the mystery Jesus brought. The mystery is that Jew and Gentile are one new humanity in Christ through faith. All these different aspects of the mystery. But the point is, the reason God was patient, passed over former sins, it shows his righteousness. Not only does the gospel show his righteousness through the work of Jesus, but how God dealt with humanity prior to the work of the cross, and even those who are in the generation of Jesus, demonstrates his righteousness. And you go, how? Well, what's in mind here is his patience, forbearance, delaying of payment. Here we have in mind, when God shows his righteousness, he's not regarding someone's sin, but rather letting them continue to enjoy his breath and his life, and not judging them in that moment, condemning them. He's showing his righteousness at the present time. So not only does pre-gospel reveal the righteousness of God and his patience, but Jesus and his work are the ultimate example of God's righteousness at the present time. And it says, so that, in other words, here's why God shows his righteousness now in the gospel and previously in his passing over former sins through all the different methods and ways that, he put in place. It's so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith. So I want to think about this. This right here is almost the effect. God can be just and the justifier of anyone who has faith in Jesus because he's displayed his righteousness in delaying his judgment against sin and not penalizing and condemning people and letting them live and have breath and have the chance to believe. And Jesus' work on the cross also plays a role in that God is just and the justifier of the one who has faith. Meaning this is God delaying judgment so that people can believe. And he is just, and he's the one who does the justifying. This is not God rewarding someone for doing works of the law. It's God choosing not to penalize someone for their sin and let them have chance after chance to believe the gospel. And when they do, God is glorified. And you go, how? Because he gets all the glory in justifying someone. He gets all the glory, he gets all the praise and all the worship and all the thankfulness in justly declaring someone righteous. Verse 27, he goes, then what becomes of our boasting? What's the grounds of our bragging and boasting? And Paul goes, it's excluded. As an Israelite nation, you're the chosen people of God. You're the chosen nation. You need some grounds for boasting. We have Abraham. We have the covenant. We have the law. We have the temple. We have the sacrifices. We have the priesthood. We're the chosen nation. We have the presence of God. We have physical circumcision. And Paul's going, all of that boasting you're used to historically as a nation, it's completely washed away. There is no reason to boast because it's God who justifies you for having faith. So notice how having faith in Jesus precedes being justified by God. By what kind of law? Now this is where we get to answer the original question that hopefully hooked you to watch this video, which is, okay, by what kind of law? By what kind of law are we justified by God? By a law of works? No. By the law of faith. And you go, hold on. You said that faith and self-righteous moral works of the law are contrasted in Scripture. And yet, here we have the law being paired with faith. Number one, we got to think about how the law plays into the gospel. The law and the prophets proclaim Jesus, testify of Jesus, foreshadow Jesus, prophesy of Jesus, all these different things, okay? The Hebrew scriptures declare he's coming, he's coming, he's coming. At the same time, the law also exposes your sinfulness and says you can't do it, you need him. So here we have the law of faith being the means by which someone is declared just by God, who is the justifier. Who does God justify in his sight? Those who have faith, okay? In other words, when we talk about the law, usually what comes to mind for you are the 10 commandments. God says do, God says don't, those are the rules. The word law, simply in the Greek, doesn't always have to mean a list of commands and rules and do's and don'ts. It can be simply the way, the methodology of how something works, explaining how something functionally works or operates, the means by which something, is doing what it does. Think about the law of gravity. That's a good example. How, when we say that, we're saying, not saying there's a do and a don't and a guideline. We're saying the way that gravity functions, the way that we can explain how it works in our world. Okay. In the same way here, it says the law of faith. And that's where we kind of scratch our heads and go, What Paul is very simply saying is the law of faith is explaining how God justifies someone who has faith. That's you go, okay, by what law? And God goes, well, I don't justify people based on their obedience to the law or based on their ability to fulfill the law. I justify people who have faith in Jesus. And there is a way to explain it. It's called the law of faith. It's God makes you righteous through your faith. And we have to keep in mind that it's apart from the law and your efforts and your works and your ability morally, right? So that's why boasting is excluded, because God is not declaring you righteous by means of his law, but outside of that, apart from that, he's declaring you righteous through your faith. And that still involves the law as having a role to play in the gospel, which is that it declares your sinfulness and points you to the one who saves and shows your inability, exposes your problem so you can look to Jesus for the solution. So that's very simply the law of, let's keep reading, okay? The law of works here is contrasted with the law of faith, right? The law of works says, here's how you get righteous by the law. You have to do what the law demands perfectly to a T and never mess up. That is the way the law and righteousness collide. That's the way you can be made righteous through the law, which means no one can do it. So if I can't be righteous by the law of God, right? And there's a law that explains how that functions. How can I be made righteous? And Paul goes, by the law of faith, which is what God's always been about. He's always been about righteousness through faith. Believe him, take him at his word, obey what he's saying, which is to receive, right? We saw that earlier. Receive him in faith. For we hold that one is justified by faith apart from works of the law. In other words, he explains what the law of faith is. Okay, well, break this down. If you're, if you're like me and you like to break things down and show me the logistical processes of it. Okay, Paul would go, well, the law of faith works like this. You are justified by faith. And you go, okay, you said that already. And it's also apart from works of the law. That's very simply what the law of faith is. It's explaining how that works. 4. And he's going to use this as an argument, or at least to set the tone and the foundation for an argument. So he's going, you can't boast. Physical circumcision, descent from Abraham, we have the law. You can't boast because God doesn't declare you righteous by your efforts and what you refer to as the works of the law. Okay, how does he declare you righteous? Through faith. So it's a gift. You don't deserve it. You didn't work for it. Jesus did. So let me explain what the law of faith is. Boom, verse 28. Now verse 29, he goes, or is God the God of Jews only? Because this is where an Israelite might perk up and go, well, only we can have faith like our father Abraham. And Paul's going to correct that way of thinking. Is God the God of Jews only? You got to understand, as Paul's writing this, he's not just addressing one main point every time. There are subpoints. There are side tangents he has to address to fully address that main point. Is he not the God of Gentiles also? Yes, of Gentiles also, since God is one. So what he's about to say is going to prove what? That God is the God of Gentiles and of Jews. Not Jews only, and not just Gentiles, but both. And that's not a completely new concept. If you read the Hebrew scriptures, there was always a means by which the stranger, the sojourner, the foreigner could have a degree of access to the things of Israel, but never the full access. There was a little, you're just like a JV or varsity. Since God is one who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through faith, do we then overthrow the law by this faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. So Paul is continuing to unpack, how does faith relate to the law? How does righteousness? He's taken all these ideas, faith, righteousness, salvation, being the people of God. He's taken all those ideas and kind of connecting it back to the law. And say, how does the law affect righteousness? You can't be righteous by the law. How does the law relate to physical circumcision? Well, it declares you need to be because the Abrahamic covenant, but that no longer has anything to do with your salvation, nor did it ever. Lots of physically circumcised Israelites didn't have the faith of Abraham, right? Since God is one who will justify the circumcised, which is the Jews, by faith, and the uncircumcised, highlighted in yellow, by faith. So both times, whether you're a circumcised Jew or whether you're an uncircumcised Gentile, why is it that God shows no distinction? Everyone's under sin. Everyone's violated his commands and rebelled. No one's perfect. So this really does level out the playing field. So if you're circumcised, you're saved by faith. If you're uncircumcised, you're saved by faith. And then Paul's going to address this other thing. Do we then overthrow the law by this faith? Because that is naturally going to be the next question. If the law of God cannot save, and now I'm righteous apart from the law, do we just completely overthrow the law of God by this faith? And he says, no. Which Paul will say, ask these rhetorical questions and then answer them himself. quite a bit. And they're usually the same thing. Shall we? By no means. In chapter 6, he'll say, shall we sin so that grace may abound? By no means. Or he'll talk about here in chapter 3, I think it is. He says, what? Are we Jews better off? Not at all. So he'll ask these kinds of questions. But it's interesting that several times these rhetorical questions have to do with living in sin. By no means. In other words, obedience does matter. It's just your moral efforts to obey that's not what gains you righteousness. Faith does. So is faith going to be in opposition to the law of God? No, I'm saved through faith apart from works of the law, but that doesn't mean it's to the neglect completely of the law now that I'm a Christian, now that I'm a believer. That means I have nothing to do. That doesn't mean I have nothing to do with the law of God. Actually, on the contrary, he says we uphold the law. What does he mean by that? We'll find out in chapter 4 when he talks about Abraham. But I believe the law here refers to, very simply, Torah. It's not explaining the way something works or how something functions. Rather, now that you are of the faith of Abraham, do you completely discard the law? And Paul goes, actually, we uphold that. Is that through obedience? Is that through your faith in Jesus? And he fulfilled the law? What does he mean? We'll unpack this in chapter 4 when we get to the next Bible study walkthrough. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do that and hit the bell so you can be notified of any future videos that come out. And check out AboveReproachMinistry.com. We have completely free Bible study courses, a 40-day program, a 27-day, and 11-day program, all kinds of free resources. You can get a copy of my book. You can join our online church. You can get some merch. We have a bunch of stuff at AboveReproachMinistry.com. And it's also linked in the description below. Go check that out. And thanks for watching.